It was just another session in the big government chamber. The room was full of voices, people talking, joking, arguing over bills and reports. Most of the members of parliament were relaxed, some sipping tea, others scrolling through their notes. Outside, cameras flashed and journalists waited for anything interesting to happen. Inside, nobody expected much today. Among the sea of suits and official nameplate sat a man in a plain black jacket, quiet and still. He didn't look like someone important. No tie. No loud entrance. Just a calm face and eyes that looked like they'd seen too much. A few people glanced at him, but didn't recognize him right away. One MP, from the back row, leaned toward his colleague and whispered, "You know who that guy looks like? Keanu Reeves." His friend squinted, chuckled, and said, "No, can't be. What would he be doing here?" Another MP overheard and added, "Isn't that the guy who dodges bullets in slow motion?" The comment sparked laughter from a small group. The joke started rolling. "Oh yeah." Someone laughed. "The sad guy from the bench memes. He's the most boring actor ever. Looks like a lost tourist." The man didn't react. He just sat there, quiet and polite. The laughter wasn't loud, but it was sharp. Some MPs were clearly enjoying themselves at his expense, thinking he couldn't hear or wouldn't care. A few looked uncomfortable, recognizing the man but unsure if they should speak up. The member of parliament who had invited Keanu noticed the mood shifting. He stood up and cleared his throat, but nobody paid attention. Not yet. What no one in the room knew, not the ones laughing, not even the ones watching from the gallery, was that the man they were mocking had experienced pain. Most of them couldn't imagine. He had buried a child. He had sat beside a dying partner. He had walked through grief with no cameras, no interviews, and no applause. And yet, he had spent his life helping strangers, but the chamber didn't see that yet. All they saw was a famous face in a room full of serious people. They thought they were better, more important, wiser, more respectable. Still, the man didn't speak. His eyes wandered across the old wooden walls, the giant flags, the polished brass symbols of power. He didn't look angry, just thoughtful. A young assistant who had recognized him whispered to another staff member, "That's really him. You know, Keanu Reeves. He's been helping a hospital in the city. Paid for a whole children's cancer wing." The other assistant's eyes widened. "Seriously? Why isn't that in the news?" He asked them not to tell anyone. The first assistant replied quietly. He didn't want attention. Back in the chamber, the laughter had died down, but the mood was still smug. One MP smirked and said loudly, "Let's hope he doesn't try to do his speech in bullet time." More laughter. The man finally looked up, not annoyed, just curious, as if he was wondering what made people forget to be kind. Then the session officially began. The speaker called for order. The member of parliament who had invited the man stood up again, this time with the microphone on, and spoke calmly. "Before we begin today's agenda, I'd like to introduce someone. He's not here as an actor. He's not here for publicity. He's not even here to speak, unless he chooses to. He's here because he's helped people in this country in ways most of us will never know." The room fell a little quieter. He's funded hospital wings. He's paid bills for strangers. He's done it quietly with no cameras and no headlines. And he's done it while carrying more pain than many of us could handle. The MPs who had laughed shifted in their seats. "Ladies and gentlemen," the MP said firmly, "please welcome Mr. Keanu Reeves." Now the room truly went silent. Heads turned. Eyes widened. The whispers stopped. Keanu didn't stand up. He just gave a small nod. A few people clapped, unsure if they should. Others sat frozen, unsure how to react. The same man they had mocked was now being introduced not as a movie star but as a man of quiet kindness. The air in the chamber had changed. The laughter from earlier hung in the air like a bad smell. Some MPs looked at each other awkwardly. A few cleared their throats. Others avoided eye contact. And yet, Keanu didn't show any sign of offense. He didn't glare. He didn't scold. He just waited. What would he say if he chose to speak? The room didn't know it yet, but one line from him would silence the entire chamber. And it was coming very soon. The room was still. For a few moments, no one said anything. Keanu Reeves sat quietly in his chair, his hands resting in his lap. He didn't look proud or angry. He looked peaceful, like someone used to being alone in a crowd. The room was full of powerful people, leaders, lawmakers, people used to being in control. But suddenly, none of them seemed so important. The member of parliament who had invited him continued to speak. "Some of you may wonder why he's here. Let me tell you the truth. Mr. Reeves didn't ask to come. I invited him. I asked him to see for himself how our policies affect people outside these walls. People like the children in cancer wards, the struggling families, the lonely, the forgotten. A few people shifted uncomfortably in their seats. They had just laughed at the man who had given millions to help strangers. Some now realized how foolish that looked. But Keanu didn't even glance at them. He wasn't there to shame anyone. He simply listened, as if he truly wanted to understand. One older member leaned toward a colleague and whispered, "He's not like the others, is he?" His friend nodded slowly. "No, he's different." Keanu's face was calm, but there was a deep sadness in his eyes. It wasn't the sadness of someone who had just heard mean jokes. It was the sadness of someone who had been through real pain. It showed in the way he sat, in the way he listened, in the way he didn't pretend to be better than anyone. A young MP finally gathered the courage to speak. She stood up and asked, "Mr. Reeves, is it true that you ride the bus every day in Los Angeles?" Some people laughed again, but this time it wasn't mean, it was curious. They wanted to know more. Keanu smiled softly and nodded. "Yes," he said, his voice low and steady. "I like it. I meet kind people there." Simple answer. No ego. No big speech. The Speaker of the House looked surprised. "You're one of the most famous men in the world. You could have private cars, drivers, anything. Why the bus?" Keanu gave a small shrug. "Because I'm not better than anyone." The room went quiet again. It wasn't a clever line. It was just true. And because it was true, it hit harder than anything else said that day. A few members clapped, slowly, then more joined in. The applause wasn't loud, but it was honest. For the first time that day, people weren't acting like politicians. They were just people. Keanu looked a little uncomfortable with the attention. He wasn't used to applause for his real self, only for the characters he played. And yet, in that moment, he was more real than anyone in the chamber. After the short silence, another MP stood up. He was one of the ones who had laughed earlier. He cleared his throat and said, "Mr. Reeves, I want to apologize. We didn't know who you really were." Keanu smiled again, this time with kindness in his eyes. "It's okay," he said. "You don't need to know who I am. Just know that people out there are hurting, and we have the power to help them." That simple line landed hard. The room had heard many long speeches before. Hours of debate, endless promises, but this was different. No drama, no shouting. Just a man who had lost so much, quietly asking them to care. The Speaker, moved by the moment, decided to give Keanu a few minutes to speak if he wished. "Mr. Reeves, would you like to say something to the chamber?" There was a pause. Keanu stood slowly, not rushing, not trying to impress. He looked around the chamber with soft eyes. No anger, no pride, just a quiet strength. People leaned in, waiting to hear what he would say. And that was when everything changed. But that moment, the moment just before he spoke, was powerful in its own way. The world outside didn't know yet, but inside that chamber a shift was happening. The man they had laughed at had earned their respect without saying a single powerful word. He had done it with silence, with patience, with kindness. Now all eyes were on him, and the whole room was about to be silenced by just one sentence. Keanu Reeves stood there, facing a room full of powerful men and women. His hands were still, his face calm. He didn't have papers, didn't check notes, and didn't speak like a politician. Yet everyone waited. Holding their breath, he began in a soft voice. "I'm not here to give a speech," he said. And a few people smiled at the honesty. "I was invited, and I came to listen." He paused, letting the words settle. "But since I'm standing here," he continued, "maybe I can just share something." The room leaned in. Keanu didn't talk about movies. He didn't mention fame, red carpets, or success. Instead, he started telling real stories, quiet stories of people no one else noticed. He talked about a janitor he had met during filming, a man who worked at jobs and never complained. "He told me once that he didn't mind being invisible. He just wanted to make sure the floors were clean for the kids in the morning." Keanu paused. That stayed with me, because he was proud, not of money or power, but of doing something that mattered. Then Keanu talked about a little girl he met at a hospital. She had cancer, he said gently. She was 6 years old. Her name was Leela. She loved drawing superheroes, and she thought I was one. He smiled a little, but his eyes showed pain. I wasn't a superhero. I couldn't save her, but I sat with her. I held her hand, and when she passed away, I was there. The room was completely silent, not a whisper, not a movement. "Some of you think I'm here to be praised," he said. "I'm not. I've made mistakes. I've been broken. I've lost people I love. But every time I get a chance to help someone, I take it. Not because I'm good, but because I know what it's like to feel helpless." He looked around the room. I'm not asking for attention. I'm asking you to remember the people you serve. Not the headlines. Not the votes. The people. His words were simple, but they cut deep. Many in the room had never heard someone speak like that. No performance. No clever words. Just truth. And sometimes, truth was the loudest thing of all. One MP, an older man known for being harsh and strict, had tears in his eyes. Another looked down at her lap, ashamed of how she had laughed earlier. Keanu didn't stay long at the podium. After just a few minutes, he said, "Thank you for listening," and sat down again. But the room was different now. The air felt heavy, like everyone was thinking not about power, but about people. That's when the MP who had invited him stood up again. "If you think he's just an actor," the man said, "you haven't been paying attention." He then listed a few things the public didn't know. Keanu gave 70% of his first Matrix earnings to leukemia research. He quietly built a foundation for children's hospitals. He visits patients without press. He gives up his seats on trains. He signs autographs without attitude. He doesn't live in a mansion. He has no bodyguards. He walks alone, the chamber. Listen in silence. He gave money to a crew member whose family was in debt. He bought motorcycles for all his stunt team. He doesn't just act like a hero in films, he lives like one outside. Some MPs were stunned. They had seen the man, heard his voice, and now understood the truth. He wasn't there for applause. He wasn't there for votes. He was there to remind them what humanity looks like. And that's when the mood changed completely. One woman stood up and clapped softly, slowly. Then another followed. Then the whole room. It wasn't a standing ovation, a celebration. It was an ovation of respect. A man who had suffered, who had given quietly, who had asked for nothing but reminded everyone what it meant to care. Keanu didn't smile proudly. He just nodded his head once, humbly. And even in that simple gesture, the chamber saw more strength than they had seen in 1,000 speeches. They had laughed at him. But now, they looked at him with something else. Admiration. Not because he was famous, but because he was real. After Keanu Reeves finished speaking and sat down, the room stayed quiet. There was no music, no flashing lights, no big applause, just silence. The kind of silence that made people think deeply. For a moment, it felt like the chamber had become something else, not a place of politics and power, but a place where truth had been spoken. Some people looked down at their hands. Others glanced at Keanu, unsure what to say now. But not everyone liked what had just happened. One of the older members, a man known for his sharp tongue, leaned back in his chair and scoffed. He cleared his throat loudly and said, "Well, that was touching, I suppose. But let's not forget we're here to make laws, not listen to sob stories." Several heads turned sharply toward him. The tone had suddenly changed. Another MP, sitting across the aisle, smirked and added, "Yes. I mean, it's a nice tale. He's a good actor, after all. Maybe he rehearsed that speech, who knows?" A few light chuckles followed, but they felt weak, forced. The mood had shifted, but some just couldn't accept it. The Speaker of the House looked surprised. "With respect," he said, "Mr. Reeves is not here to perform." He shared something deeply personal. The first man shrugged. "Look, we're wasting time. Just because someone is famed doesn't mean their feelings should guide policy." Another MP joined in, saying, "So he gave money? Big deal. Many people donate. Doesn't mean we change how we run a country." It was like a small wave of resistance had begun. A few members clearly felt uncomfortable that an outsider, a celebrity, had been given space to speak in their chamber. To them, it wasn't about kindness or pain. It was about power, about who should be allowed to speak and who shouldn't. Keanu didn't respond. He simply listened. But the room was beginning to crack. Some MPs who had earlier been touched were now quiet, afraid to speak up. Others stared coldly, watching the debate turn. Then one voice cut through the tension. It was a young woman, an MP from a small district known for her charity work. She stood up slowly, holding her notes but not looking at them. "I wasn't going to speak today," she said, her voice steady. "But I have to." Everyone turned to look at her. "I grew up in a house where we had to choose between food and heating. My mother worked 2 jobs. We never met anyone famous. We didn't have anyone to help. But one day, a local charity paid for my school books. I don't know who donated, but I do know I wouldn't be here if someone hadn't cared." She looked at Keanu. "Maybe people like him remind us that what we do here isn't about rules. It's about people." Her words carried weight. The chamber fell quiet again. Not the cold kind of silence, but the respectful kind. The older MP who had mocked earlier looked uncomfortable. He tried to respond, but the speaker didn't give him the floor. Another woman, sitting behind Keanu, spoke up too. We argue all day in this room, she said. But when was the last time we listened to someone who didn't come here to ask for votes? He didn't ask for anything. He just shared his truth. And then something happened that no one expected. A man from the opposing party, someone known for being tough, hard, and never emotional, stood up. He adjusted his jacket and said, I lost my wife to cancer 5 years ago. I held her hand as she left this world. And I've never been the same. He looked straight at Keanu. When you said you've done that too, I felt that. His voice cracked slightly, but he continued. This chamber talks about numbers, budgets, votes, but sometimes we forget the human part. The part that hurts, the part that loves. Keanu gave him a gentle nod. More members nodded too. Slowly, the mood in the room was shifting again, not because of speeches, but because of honesty. But the earlier mocking words still hung in the air like smoke. The sting of being laughed at could not be taken back. Yet Keanu never once responded with anger or pride. His silence, his calm, his patience, those spoke louder than any insult ever could. People began to realize that something powerful had just taken place. Not everyone had seen it yet. Some were still stuck in pride or politics. But others, many others, were beginning to understand. Keanu had not come to impress. He had come to remind them of the people outside those thick walls, people who suffered quietly, people like the janitor he spoke of, like the girl named Leela, like the man who lost his wife, and like himself. He wasn't just a movie star today. He was a mirror showing the chamber what they had forgotten. And in doing so, he was about to give them something they'd never forget. The room was filled with tension. Everyone had heard the mocking words. Some still sat proudly, arms crossed, refusing to be moved. Others sat quietly, staring at the floor, unsure what to feel. Keanu Reeves had already spoken once. He hadn't raised his voice. He hadn't told anyone what to do. But his words had touched many hearts. Still, some MPs thought it wasn't enough. They thought fame meant nothing in this place, and they didn't want to be told how to feel. One of them spoke again, his voice louder this time. Well, he said with a fake smile, I think we've heard enough sad stories for one day. Can we move on to real business now? The chamber froze. It wasn't just rude. It was cruel. All eyes turned to Keanu again. He stood up slowly, not in anger, but with a quiet strength. No one asked him to speak. No one gave him permission. But no one stopped him either. He looked around the room. His eyes didn't judge. They were calm, almost gentle. And then he said the line that would never be forgotten. I don't pretend to know politics, he began, his voice steady. But I do know what it feels like to hold someone's hand while they die. Silence, the kind of silence that makes your skin prickle. No one moved. No one blinked. Keanu wasn't performing. He wasn't acting. He was remembering. I've sat beside a hospital bed. He continued, feeling helpless, watching someone I love fade away. I couldn't save them. I couldn't stop it. But I stayed. I held their hand. His voice didn't shake, but there was deep emotion behind every word. When you've lived through that, he said, you understand what real pain is, and you learn kindness matters. People stared at him, no longer seeing the Hollywood star. They saw a man who had suffered, who had broken, and who still chose to be kind. If helping even one person feel less alone, he said, makes me unimportant in your eyes, then I'm okay with that. That was it. No long speech, no dramatic moment, just one truth spoken softly, and it broke the room. Some MPs looked down, ashamed. Others had tears in their eyes. Even the ones who had mocked him sat frozen. His words weren't loud, but they hit harder than any speech they'd ever heard. The speaker couldn't speak. The room had never felt like this before. It wasn't just politics now. It was human, raw, real. A young assistant standing at the edge of the room later said, it felt like time stopped. Another whispered, that was the moment everything changed. No one clapped. No one cheered. It didn't feel right. It wasn't a performance, it was a moment of truth. Keanu sat back down. He didn't look proud. He didn't smile. He just looked tired, like a man who had carried his pain quietly for years, and had finally spoken it out loud. And the room respected that. No one dared speak for a while. Then, one by one, MPs began to stand. Not to debate, not to argue, but to thank him. One woman said, my mother passed last year. You reminded me of that day, and what it meant to be there. A man followed. My son survived cancer, he said, his voice shaky. I know what those hospital rooms feel like. Thank you for saying what many of us never could. Even the older MP who had mocked earlier couldn't hide his emotions. He didn't speak. But he nodded slowly in Keanu's direction. That small gesture was louder than anything he could have said. The entire chamber had been changed not by power or money but by a single honest sentence. Keanu didn't ask for attention. He didn't try to win hearts. But he reminded everyone of something they had forgotten. Being human means feeling. And true strength isn't in power. It's in kindness. From that moment on, the mood in the chamber shifted completely. The rest of the session felt different. People listened more. They spoke more gently. They used the word people more than numbers. No one forgot what Keanu said that day. It became a story shared across the world. But for the people in that room, it wasn't just a story. It was a moment that touched their souls. After Keanu Reeves sat back down, the entire chamber stayed silent. It was not the silence of boredom or disrespect. It was the silence of deep thought. The kind that happens after someone says something true, something that shakes your heart. People were looking at each other, but no one spoke. Some had tears in their eyes. Others had their heads down. Even the ones who had mocked earlier were quiet now. Something had changed inside the room. One of the reporters in the press gallery whispered to another, "Did you hear that line? That one sentence?" The other nodded, stunned. "Yeah. I'll never forget it." Keanu had not raised his voice. He had not attacked anyone. He had simply shared a part of his life, a painful part. And in doing so, he reminded everyone in the room that kindness still matters. That humanity still matters. A few minutes later, the speaker finally found his voice. "Thank you, Mr. Reeves," he said softly. "Your words have reminded us of why we're here." Then, one by one, members of Parliament began to speak, but not in the way they usually did. They didn't shout. They didn't argue. They didn't push their opinions. Instead, they shared stories. One MP stood up. "I lost my brother in a car accident," he said. "I was with him in the hospital. I didn't know what to say, but I held his hand until the very end." He paused and looked at Keanu. "You made me remember that moment. Thank you." Another MP said, "I visit the children's hospital in my district. I see the parents, the kids, the fear in their eyes, but I never really understood their pain." Not like this. People in the chamber began opening up. Walls came down. They weren't just politicians anymore. They were fathers, mothers, sons, daughters, people who had lived through loss, love, and regret. A woman from the opposition party, someone known for being very serious, stood up with shaking hands. "When I was young, my sister died of cancer," she said. "I didn't talk about it for years. I thought being strong meant hiding the pain. But now, I realize that sharing it can be strength too." She looked directly at Keanu. "You reminded us of that." The air in the room was different now. It was soft. It was human. Outside, journalists were typing fast, sending updates to news outlets, but even they were moved. One reporter later wrote, "In all my years covering Parliament, I've never seen a moment like this." A movie star came in quietly and left the chamber in tears, but Keanu wasn't smiling. He wasn't proud. He just looked thoughtful. He had come here because someone invited him. He didn't want to be a hero. He didn't want attention. He just wanted to speak the truth. And somehow, that truth had reached every corner of the chamber. Even people who usually fought with each other now found something to agree on. One MP from the government side said, "I think we forget how powerful simple kindness can be. We focus so much on policies and rules, we forget the people behind them." Someone from the opposite bench nodded. "We should start every session by reminding ourselves who we serve." And just like that, a serious discussion began, not about laws or budgets, but about how to be better leaders, kinder leaders, leaders who remember pain, not just politics. But it didn't stop there. The speaker suggested a short break. During that break, many MPs walked over to Keanu. They didn't come with cameras or smiles for the press. They came with quiet words, with handshakes, and with real gratitude. One MP said, "I mocked you earlier." "I'm sorry," another whispered. "My son loves your movies, but today, I saw the man behind the movies, and I respect him even more." Keanu nodded, accepting each word with humility. He didn't act like a hero. He didn't boast. He simply listened, just like he had listened from the very beginning. Outside, the news was already spreading. Keanu Reeves silences Parliament with a single line. One headline read. Another said, "Hollywood star brings humanity back to Government Hall." But the real change wasn't in the news. It was in the hearts of the people inside that room. Later that day, one MP walked outside and was asked by a reporter, "Do you think Keanu Reeves changed anything today?" The MP didn't pause. "Yes," he said. "He reminded us that behind every law, behind every vote is a person, a real person, with pain, with hope, with a hand that might need holding." And that was the truth. In just a few minutes, Keanu had done what hundreds of speeches had failed to do. He made them feel again. And that feeling would not be forgotten. After the break, the chamber was still full, but the mood was softer. Gone was the sharpness that usually filled the room. Now, people looked at each other differently, not as rivals, but as fellow human beings. Keanu Reeves had returned to his seat. He didn't try to speak again. He had already said more than enough, but his presence was still powerful. He sat quietly, hands folded, watching the others with calm eyes. Word had spread quickly outside the building. Reporters were already gathering at the gates. News vans parked along the roads. Social media was filled with clips and quotes. The line Keanu had spoken, "I know what it feels like to hold someone's hand while they die," had gone viral. In minutes, people around the world were sharing it, repeating it, crying over it. But Keanu didn't care about that. He wasn't here for fame. He had already walked away from spotlights many times in his life. He was here for something deeper. Inside the chamber, the change was becoming clearer. For the first time in many years, people weren't arguing. They were listening. One by one, members shared real-life stories. Not about policies or taxes, but about grief, family, and the people they had met along their journey. One man, known for never showing emotion, said, "I've always believed in being strong. I thought feelings made you weak. But today, I understand that kindness can be strength too." Another woman stood up. "There's a girl in my district who lost her father to illness. She once told me she wished someone would just listen. I thought I had no time back then. After today, I'll make time." And then came something no one expected. An older MP, who had mocked Keanu earlier, raised his hand to speak. Everyone watched, unsure of what he would say. He stood slowly and took a deep breath. "I was wrong," he said. "When Mr. Reeves walked into this chamber, I saw a celebrity. I thought he didn't belong here. I made jokes. But then he said something that reminded me of the night my own father passed away." He paused, voice shaking. "I held my dad's hand too. I never talked about it. I buried that memory deep. But today, it came back. Not as pain but as truth." He looked at Keanu. "Thank you for that." Keanu gave a small nod. It wasn't proud. It was respectful. The kind of nod that said, "I see you." That moment opened the final door. Now everyone in the room felt safe to be honest. Politics were set aside. Egos were quiet. What remained was the real reason they had entered public service in the first place: to care for people. One MP suggested creating a new rule that each month, the chamber would hear from one ordinary citizen. Someone with no fame, no power, no title, just a story, a truth. The idea was met with surprising support. It could be a nurse, one said. A teacher, said another. A janitor, someone added. Like the one Keanu talked about. They all nodded. Something was beginning, a small movement, a return to empathy. Outside the chamber, staff members whispered to each other. "Have you ever seen anything like this?" One asked. "No." Another replied. "It's like the walls finally listened." Meanwhile, Keanu stood up quietly. He shook hands with the MP who had invited him, then with a few others who approached. No cameras, no reporters, just quiet, respectful goodbyes. He didn't stay for praise. He didn't wait to be thanked. As he reached the exit, a young assistant ran up to him and said, "Mr. Reeves, why did you agree to come today?" Keanu paused, smiled gently, and replied, "Because sometimes people just need a reminder." Then he stepped out into the light. Behind him, the chamber doors closed. But inside, something had changed. The MPs didn't return to business as usual. Not yet. They kept talking, but now, their voices were gentler. Their ideas were kinder. They weren't just thinking about laws anymore. They were thinking about people. And all of it had started because one man came in, said just a few words, and walked away. Keanu didn't want credit, but the truth was clear that day. He had given the chamber something no one else could, a reason to feel again, a reason to remember why they served, and the courage to be human again. Keanu Reeves didn't wait for applause. He didn't stop to smile for cameras. As soon as the session was over, he quietly walked out of the chamber and left the building. A few security guards offered to escort him to his car, but he politely waved them off. He didn't need protection, he just needed space. Outside, reporters rushed toward him. Microphones were pointed. Cameras flashed. "Mr. Reeves, why did you come here today? Do you think Parliament will change because of your words? Was that all planned?" Keanu didn't stop walking, but he said softly, "It wasn't about me. It was about remembering what matters." That was the only quote he gave. He got into a simple black car and drove off. no convoy, no loud goodbye, just silence. But inside the Parliament building, his words stayed behind. Later that evening, some members stayed late, still talking about what had happened. These were people who usually left as soon as meetings ended. But now, they sat together, rivals and allies, sharing memories, ideas, and quiet regrets. One MP said, "I've spent years trying to look strong. Today, I realized being honest is even stronger." Another added, "All those fancy speeches we make, they don't stay with people. But what he said today, that will stay with me forever." Across the country, people were watching. The video of Keanu's short speech was everywhere now: TV, online, social media. Millions were sharing it with comments like, "This brought me to tears." Or, "How can someone be so famous and yet so humble?" But few knew just how much pain he had gone through. Many people had seen him in movies: The Matrix, John Wick, Speed. They knew the action star, the tough guy. But not everyone knew the real Keanu. They didn't know he had lost his daughter at birth. They didn't know the love of his life died in a car crash. They didn't know he once gave away most of his earnings from a blockbuster film to support cancer research. After watching his sister fight leukemia for years, he never spoke about these things unless asked. And even then, he spoke with gentleness, not sadness. But when he stood in Parliament that day, he let the world see a different side of him, a side filled with love, pain, patience, and strength. And that made the difference. Back in Parliament, some MPs began writing a proposal, one that would dedicate a day each year to human stories. A day when the government would listen to the people, not numbers, not votes, but their voices. An older MP who once mocked Keanu said, "He didn't just speak to us, he woke us up." Even people who weren't in the room felt the impact. Nurse from a children's hospital wrote online, "Keanu visited our ward last year. No cameras, no interviews, just hugs and smiles. He sat on the floor and talked to a boy for an hour. That boy passed away a week later, but said it was the happiest day of his life." A teacher from a small town wrote, "My students watched the clip in class. They cried. Then we spent the day talking about kindness." One parent wrote, "My daughter lost her brother last year. Today, she watched that video and said, 'Now I know we're not alone.'" The wave kept growing. People across the world weren't just praising Keanu, they were remembering what it meant to be kind. He didn't change the world with a speech, he changed it with truth, with one line that came from real experience, real pain, and real love. And maybe that's why it worked, because it wasn't written by a speechwriter. It wasn't meant to impress. It was simply one man telling the truth in a room that had forgotten how to listen. In the days that followed, Parliament made small but meaningful changes. Some MPs started visiting hospitals. Others began listening more carefully to their communities. They held meetings not just with wealthy donors, but with ordinary people: nurses, farmers, students, shopkeepers. One MP even wrote a letter to Keanu. It read, "You came in silence and left with no demand, but your words echoed louder than anything we've ever heard. Thank you for reminding us what it means to serve." Keanu never replied, but he read it. He smiled, and then he went back to doing what he always did: living quietly, giving quietly, and reminding people that true kindness doesn't shout. It whispers. It holds hands. It sits beside a child who is scared. It forgives those who laugh. And sometimes, it stands in a room full of power and makes everyone remember what it means to feel human again.